Here's the uncomfortable truth. Janice Soprano might be the only person in the entire series who ever calls Tony out correctly. The Sopranos has always excelled at capturing the kind of everyday humiliation and irritation that requires no mob affiliation to understand. Consider the exquisite disaster of Tony ridiculing Bobby for being robbed, a moment so socially exinged that even Silvio can only communicate through increasingly desperate eye pleading. Tony, naturally, barrels forward, mocking a captain who actually handled his misfortune correctly, all while broadcasting how little he thinks of the men supposedly under his protection. Leadership, apparently, is optional. Then there is Junior, the show's undisputed poet laureate of exasperation. His eruption, Grand Central Station, over a kitchen containing a whopping 4 people, remains a masterclass in crowd-related despair. His even more elegant outburst when something is left upstairs, God, to hell with all of it, captures the universal experience of realizing life is nothing more than a relay race between floors. The Baccalieri robbery only gets richer with Janice, rarely the show's moral compass, correctly pointing out Tony's compulsive need to belittle Bobby. Siblings, after all, possess a finely tuned radar for each other's nonsense. She and Tony may be spiritual twins in dysfunction, a familial inheritance so potent that Barbara wisely kept a continent of emotional distance. Some genetic gifts are best admired from afar. Honor and loyalty unravel just as quickly. Carlo abandons Omerta the second Tony dismisses his Twilight Zone musings. Tony's brilliant managerial advice, watch less TV, receives an equally inspired retort about Vito's financial contributions, delivered at maximum volume. Naturally, Carlo flips. Apparently, betrayal requires little more than a raised voice and an insult about construction revenue. The series also excels at quieter, culinary betrayals. Ordering something simple and virtuous, only to immediately revoke the decision the moment someone else's steak glides past, is perhaps the most honest depiction of self-control ever filmed. Another steak sandwich becomes both mantra and coping mechanism. Family dinners offer no reprieve. Whether it's Tony unraveling at the table or launching into a patriotic tirade insisting that Christopher Columbus is a heroic Italian explorer forever wronged by history, domestic life remains one long cultural dissertation no one asked for. Even fugitives get moments of grim relatability. Vito, hiding in New Hampshire, meticulously calculates the time by the angle of the sun, determined not to look at his watch until he's earned the reward. A man on the run, yes, but also a man clinging to the small rituals that keep chaos at bay. Artie Bucco contributes with an expression worthy of fine art when he mutters, "Benny Fazio, criminal mastermind," a face that captures not only skepticism, but entire centuries of culinary torment. Some moments drift into less universal territory, such as the remark about sucking a man's cock on the job site before work, complete with an unsolicited distinction between catching and pitching. The show's exploration of identity was never subtle, but it was certainly thorough. And then there's AJ, laughing at a computer screen instead of looking for employment, while Tony silently combusts in the hallway. Few scenes capture the helpless fury of watching someone else choose frivolity over responsibility with such accuracy. In the end, The Sopranos remains unmatched not just for its portrayal of crime, but for its meticulous, merciless depiction of how ridiculous people are in the smallest, most mundane ways. The mob may be dangerous, but the daily irritations are the true assassins. Are you trying to figure out whether the Russian survived, escaped, or simply wandered off because the plot was done with him? The enduring obsession with the disappearing Russian from Pine Barrens tends to hinge on one irresistible detail: that overhead shot of Christopher and Polly milling around in the snow, apparently surrounded by nothing except brown trees, white silence, and a conspicuous absence of footprints. Naturally, this has inspired the theory that the wounded Russian survived by climbing a tree, because nothing says skilled ex-interior decorator quite like spontaneous mastery of vertical escape routes. Some supporters bolster the idea by proposing that scaling a trunk in sub-zero temperatures is a perfectly reasonable survival tactic. Others, feeling more imaginative, claim he did it for warmth, as if trees in New Jersey double as heated condominiums. A few attribute the alleged aerial maneuver to an entire consortium of misplaced Czechoslovakians who, one assumes, were also nesting overhead. The shot itself, as it turns out, owes nothing to Slavic acrobatics. Steve Buscemi, directing the episode, reportedly captured the angle as simple B-roll to vary the visual monotony of endless snow and trees. David Chase, upon noticing that the shot inadvertently implied a Russian point of view, mildly scolded him. Buscemi assumed this meant the footage would be removed. Chase, with his characteristic sense of mischief, left it in. Viewers have been theorizing ever since, and the only thing missing from the exchange is someone invoicing Buscemi for $1,000. A competing theory posits that the Russians simply stole Polly's car and vanished into the ether, a far less acrobatic and far more practical explanation for why the vehicle seemed to evaporate despite meticulous retracing of steps. Whether the man lived, died, or set up a modest used car dealership somewhere outside Newark appears largely irrelevant. The episode's real preoccupation lies with Chris and Polly wandering through the barren snow, confronting the emptiness of their existence and the predictable fallout of the violence they so casually inflict. Chase has publicly dismissed most theories, though his dismissals are sometimes delivered with the kind of strategic evasiveness that invites more speculation rather than less. In the end, viewers are left to choose their preferred version. The Russian who climbed a tree, the Russian who stole a car, or the Russian who simply walked out of the narrative because the narrative didn't need him anymore. Never assume the responsible parent is the hero. Some of them are just bullies with minivans. The woman Janice pummeled earned every second of it. After all, anyone who bellows, "They're just a bunch of losers," at 10-year-olds is practically begging the universe to dispatch a consequence. Predictably, the moment that consequence arrives, the culprit behaves as though physical retaliation were an unforeseeable act of God. Outrage without self-awareness remains one of society's most dependable spectacles. The scene delivers one of the show's sharpest exchanges, Janice declaring that her victim is "lucky I didn't kill her," and Tony, with impeccable timing, smirking, "Well, we all know that." It's Chase at his finest, maneuvering the audience into a delightful moral cul-de-sac. Should Janice be written off as the chronically unstable sibling Tony insists she is, or embraced as the unlikely avenger of children subjected to a particularly odious brand of sideline bullying? The show invites viewers to squirm in the tension between those two readings, and laugh while doing it. Tony's full-body wince when the televised footage airs, Janice being flattened by police officers in all her chaotic glory, only deepens the comedy. It's a beautifully orchestrated moment in which embarrassment, familiarity, and disbelief collide. The episode also brushes against a broader, uncomfortable logic, the idea that certain behavior practically solicits retaliation, even if doling it out remains socially impermissible. A counseling anecdote within the narrative crystallizes the contradiction. When someone describes a rude roommate, another participant asks why the offender isn't required to attend therapy for provoking conflict, rather than the person who reacted to it. The question lingers, inconvenient and unresolvable, much like Janice herself. Ultimately, the storyline functions as both farce and commentary, an exploration of deserved consequences, misapplied justice, and the eternal irony of people who dish it out, yet feign shock when it's returned in kind. Are you curious why Junior's jokes land while everyone else's crash and burn? The series treats humor as yet another diagnostic tool for examining the modern mobster's arrested development, and the results are rarely flattering. Nearly every punchline is engineered to sound painfully dim, intentionally so. The men erupt in laughter over material so insipid, it barely qualifies as a joke, a deliberate choice that underscores the creator's ongoing indictment of the contemporary gangster's intellectual decay. Of course, there is one exception, Junior, whose jokes remain inexplicably untouchable, even when delivered from a convalescent haze. Everyone else fares considerably worse. The infamous Ginny sack remarks, for instance, sink to a level so deplorable they do not merit revival. The only consensus they ever deserved was that they were unkind. What passes for camaraderie within the crew is often little more than compulsory performance. The laughter is frequently counterfeit, a required ritual rather than a spontaneous response. Because in this world, failing to laugh at the boss's joke is an occupational hazard. The dynamic is captured with ruthless efficiency in the brief scene at Feech's card table. Tony trots out a joke. The room dutifully explodes in mirth, and yet Feech alone sits stone-faced. He recognizes the ritual for what it is: performative fealty, not fellowship, and he resents the hollow spectacle. The material they are forced to celebrate only adds to the farce. A line as limp as, "Did you hear about the Chinese godfather? He made them an offer they couldn't understand," is treated as comedic gold, prompting a table-wide eruption of forced exuberance. Meanwhile, the underlying truth remains untouched. A hierarchy so brittle that even humor must be rehearsed, exaggerated, and weaponized. In the end, the incessant overlaughing serves a clear purpose. It exposes an empire of men who cannot afford sincerity, least of all with one another. It is little wonder the boss so often laments having no real friends. In an environment where laughter is a survival strategy, authenticity doesn't stand a chance. Are you a fan who still insists Tony was complicated, not catastrophically hollow? The final seasons of the series achieve a rare aesthetic feat. They are both beautifully crafted and utterly grotesque. Something shifted in those closing years. Perhaps the production gap, perhaps the creative confidence, but the result is a pair of seasons that turn the show's usual chaos into a slow-motion character autopsy. The writers, ever self-aware, lean into a meta-dissection of their own creation, peeling back the last scraps of charm from a protagonist who no longer pretends to deserve any. Tony's decline is not merely narrative, but atmospheric. It hangs over the show like smoke from a fire he started himself. Early seasons once played like dark comedy with a dash of mobster swagger, perfect for younger viewers who might have found the tone fun without noticing the rot underneath. But with age comes clarity, and suddenly, the once charismatic antihero reveals himself as a man defined by piggish appetites, emotional vacancy, and a baffling inability to treat his family as anything but an inconvenience. He survives a gunshot only to express more enthusiasm for cash and sex workers than for a trip to Italy with his wife. Romance, it seems, is best outsourced. The brilliance of the final stretch lies in its willingness to strip the character bare. While other prestige dramas opt for operatic fanfare and victory laps disguised as tragedy, this series chooses a far more honest approach. It leaves its protagonist irredeemable. No myth-making, no triumphant crystallization of identity, just a man descending a roller coaster engineered specifically for hell. By the final season, Tony manages to outdo even the show's most loathsome figures, not through violence, but through sheer personality erosion. His life at this point is a study in smallness. He isn't striving toward anything. He isn't even pretending to. He loathes his sister, resents his son for lacking his own brutality, and finds himself reduced to a routine of eating, sleeping, crying, and chasing any distraction that might silence the void. His morphine-button theatrics, so desperate, so shameless, perfectly encapsulate a man incapable of tolerating even minor discomfort. Strength, once his defining performance, has long since been pawned off. Rewatching these episodes as an older viewer reveals even more of the bleak artistry. The malaise sits heavier. The comic moments darken. Folly, framed against those insistent autumn leaves, becomes an accidental elegy. And through it all, James Gandolfini's physical deterioration mirrors Tony's spiritual collapse with unnerving precision. The weight gain, the strained breaths. His embodiment of the role was so complete, it took a visible toll. The final seasons may be ugly, heavy, and suffocating, but they are impactful in a way few shows dare to be. They refuse redemption, refuse sentimentality, and instead deliver a portrait of a man who ends exactly as he lived, grasping, joyless, and entirely unworthy of rescue. Are you fascinated by so-called business partners who were never planning to deliver anything except excuses? The great mystery surrounding Jean-Philippe's intentions hardly deserves the word mystery. The signs point in one direction. The arrangement was never designed to end with Artie triumphant. Whether it qualified as a full-fledged con is debatable, but the mechanics were unmistakably predatory, an operation built on seductive promises, strategic vagueness, and just enough sophistication to keep the mark believing he was on the brink of something glamorous. This was no master swindler disappearing into the wind with a suitcase of cash. Instead, it resembled a chain of desperation, someone reaching for someone else's money to fund a risky fantasy, likely because another, higher-ranking dream merchant had already sold him one. By the time Artie confronts him, Jean-Philippe's defeated, sagging demeanor suggests a man who has been conned by his own ambition as thoroughly as he ever conned anyone else. Yet the operation was hardly devoid of theatrics. Broken message machines, muddled timelines, and a conveniently unmarketable Armagnac all formed a fog of excuses that obscured the obvious. The arrangement leaned heavily on the illusion of sophistication, continental charm lacquered over incompetence. Some observers might call it Eurotrash chic, complete with the kind of smug hauteur that makes audiences long for Furio to stroll in and administer a long overdue correction. And then there was Eloise, whose role as partner was presented with just enough familial ambiguity to keep the illusion afloat. The whole setup played like a parody of international business intrigue, shaky claims of insider status, half-baked logistics, and a polished accent attempting to elevate what was, at its core, an overwrought cash grab. In the end, the scheme wasn't impressive, intricate, or clever. It was simply opportunistic, an attempt to pry $80,000 loose through charm, confusion, and a haze of Franco-European mystique. The only real revelation is how long it took for anyone to call the performance what it was. Everyone thinks the show's biggest mystery is the final scene. Here's the part no one admits. The unanswered soft drink choice tells you far more. For all the grand theorizing about interior decorators, metaphysical endings, and who did or did not die in a blackout, the series' true enigma remains stubbornly overlooked. Christopher and Benny's soft drink of choice. Yes, the beverage. The one offered with the solemnity of a knighthood at the pizza shop, right after Christopher is made. A slice of pie, a complimentary drink, an honor so sacred it might as well have come with ceremonial music. And then, naturally, Jackie starts a fight, chaos erupts, and the scene ends without the public ever witnessing the fateful selection from the cooler. It is difficult to overstate the gravity of this omission. Being offered a drink on the house in this universe is the sort of privilege that borders on divine right. To leave it unclaimed is not merely forgetful, it borders on blasphemy. One almost imagines the pizza shop owner, affronted beyond reason, quietly arranging Christopher's automotive demise as retribution for this beverage-based insult. After all, if there is any immutable rule in the underworld, it is that one does not casually spurn a complimentary soda. Speculation has run wild, of course. Coke with a slice is a classic. A sugarless Fanta would be a bold, almost avant-garde choice, an option to savor as if it were the last drink on Earth. And yet the question remains unresolved, overshadowed by louder debates no doubt convinced of their own importance. But beneath all the theorizing lies the single most piercing question the narrative never answers. Which drink did he choose? Did he return to claim it? Or does the unclaimed soda stand as the series' most quietly tragic symbol? And while the world obsesses over who ate someone's lo mein, this far greater mystery continues to sit, fizzing in eternal suspense. Here's the twist no one likes to acknowledge. Johnny Sack wasn't just better positioned, he was better, period. The great parlor game of mafia hypotheticals inevitably circles back to Phil Leotardo, the perennial question mark, the man who spent 2 decades perfecting the art of aging beside a radiator, and, some insist, the underboss who never was. The speculation hinges on a single premise. Had Phil not vanished into the penal system for 20 years, Would he have outpaced Johnny Sack and emerged as Carmine's right hand? His supporters point to seniority. Phil entered prison as a capo, a rank Johnny only later achieved. And in the world of organized crime, seniority often masquerades as competence. Of course, determining the exact length of Phil's incarceration apparently requires forensic hair color analysis, since the series never bothers with a clear timeline. Amateur scholars have turned his mugshot and post-release coiffure into a chromatic Rosetta Stone, charting grayscale progression as though the Bureau of Prisons were a salon. Yet even if the calendar cooperated, Phil himself presents the more persuasive obstacle. His talents did not exactly scream varsity material. Stories of questionable personal habits, colorful enough to travel through the grapevine, did little to endear him to upper management. Others note that his extended sentence may have inadvertently saved his life. Had he remained on the street, his gift for stepping on toes might have fast-tracked him not to the underboss's chair, but to an unmarked grave. There is also the small matter of temperament. Phil projected authority, but sophistication was another issue. Respect he had. Business acumen he lacked. Johnny Sack, by contrast, demonstrated the instincts of a true executive. His decision to relocate outside the city, insulated from the daily operatic chaos of New York's underworld, displayed a level of foresight Phil never managed. It takes a certain intelligence to recognize that survival sometimes requires nothing more glamorous than a longer commute. At best, then, Phil might have ascended to a respectable number 2 or number 3 slot, close enough to power to feel important, far enough from it to avoid breaking anything expensive. The fantasy of him sliding effortlessly into Johnny Sack's position remains just that, a fantasy. Sometimes a long prison stretch isn't what derails a career. Sometimes the derailment is innate, baked in, evident long before the radiator ever entered the picture. Subscribe.